Since you're now celebrating your 30th birthday, I hope that that will be possible. Beyond all these institutions, there's the city. Cities, especially big cities, have been described as incubators of human creativity, or hubs of creative revolutions. The geographer Peter Hall devoted a large book to creative cities in history. Ancient Athens, Renaissance Florence, Enlightenment Paris and London, Vienna at the beginning of the 20th century. One reason for the importance of cities for innovation is the concentration of institutions, especially institutions of higher education. Another reason is that the big city acts as a magnet for immigrants. People with different ways of looking at the world from the local population. Once again, it's displaced people who can contribute to the displacement of ideas. Going back to Vienna before 1914, the age of Freud, Wittgenstein, Klimt, Mahler, the architect Adolf Loos, the novelist Robert Musil, and so on. It's quite remarkable. And so is the fact that most of them were not born in Vienna. They came from the provinces. They were drawn to what was then the capital of a multilingual, multicultural empire. After 1919, Vienna declined into the capital of a small state, and it hasn't been closely associated with innovation ever since. Or take this famous case of the great exodus of the 1930s, the migration of Central European scientists and scholars, most of them Jewish, most of them German-speaking, going to the United States, going to Britain and elsewhere. The Germanic culture of method and theory, characteristic of the immigrants, encountered the more empiricist intellectual culture of their hosts in both Britain and the United States. This encounter led to lots of misunderstandings, but in the long run, it turned out to be extremely creative in fields as different as physics, sociology, and art history. Some theory rubbed off on the English, and a greater respect for empirical evidence rubbed off on some of the Germans. Of course, numbers and critical thresholds are very important here. A few immigrants might be rejected or assimilated by the host culture. But in certain small subjects, like sociology and art history in Britain in the 1930s, the critical mass of the refugees was sufficient to shake up the system and produce innovation. Of course, for this cross-fertilization to take place, the refugees had to be welcomed and given a home. The culture as a whole needed to be an open one. That was true of the Dutch Republic in the 17th century. I've got many examples, but there's no time to mention them here. And true of England in the 18th century. It's the converse of the closed culture I mentioned earlier, Spain, or indeed Japan in the same period, the early 17th century, becoming saikoku, a deliberately closed culture. So there's a need for a culture to be open and tolerant. That's the third of Richard Florida's 3 conditions for innovation, his 3 T's. He talks about talent, technology, and tolerance. But the example of Renaissance Florence reminds us of a 4th condition he doesn't mention. A culture of competition may be equally necessary for innovation. May make life less pleasant, but it does have this kind of creative effect. But the final reason, I think, or one more reason anyway, for the importance of cities in the process of innovation is that they offer the spaces of sociability, if you like, the ecological niche in which small discussion groups flourish, leading to what some people call a buzz. One bright idea stimulates another one. There was a lot of buzz in Renaissance Florence, Enlightenment London, fin de siècle Vienna. Even in the age of the internet, I think, face-to-face communication remains indispensable. In an age of urbanization, it's comforting to discover that a city is a milieu of creative milieu, including those cafes and bars where ideas are exchanged, and what has sometimes been described as spillover occurs. A new idea in one domain encouraging innovation elsewhere.